everyone, and welcome to another edition of Political Capital COVID edition from my living room. You know you like it. Baby Yoda's back there. It was a great response to Baby Yoda last week. No one responded to Baby Yoda. That's fine. We're doing the best we can with what we got during this Omicron wave. Thanks to Kyle on the tech board for keeping us live here despite all the hiccups. If anything goes wrong, it's just a part of the game here with this technical challenge. The Pod Squad is here. We are back to give you all the latest in BC politics for another week, and we want to dive right in here on the issue of Quebec's vax tax, which kind of took over the political spectrum across the country this week. The idea of taxing people who are unvaccinated as a sort of penalty or an encouragement to go get a vaccine, and as a recognition of their burden on the healthcare system. BC out very quickly saying, we're not doing this. That was Health Minister Adrian Dix's response. So let's go around the table and talk a bit about A, what we think of the vax tax, and B, BC ruling it out so quickly. Was that the right move? McLean, why don't we start with you?
I think the other provinces are probably watching Quebec just to see what happens there. There's a lot of questions about whether or not this is even legal, whether it would survive a legal challenge, either from a private citizen or or the other provinces. We don't know. The Canada Health Act, to my reading, seems to prohibit this kind of thing. Now, that's to my reading. I'm not a constitutional expert, even though I have a Twitter account. So I think there's going to be a lot of watching and waiting. We'll see what Quebec does. I don't like the idea personally. I understand the frustration and I understand the politics of wanting to blame the unvaccinated. But I don't think it's good policy, and I think a lot of the country is going to be keeping a close eye on Quebec City.
Yeah, I mean, who knows if it is constitutional or not? An impediment to our universal healthcare system is not allowed, but it's not entirely clear what Quebec is going to charge and how they're going to charge it. They seem to want to levy it to anyone, whether they use the healthcare system or not. Katie, what about you? What do you think of A, the idea? And I know last week on the show you talked a bit about wanting to kind of crack down on the unvaccinated in a sense, and then B's kind of BC's rejection of that.
Yeah, so I have zero time for selfish idiots who choose not to get vaccinated. But I do think that imposing a tax like this does set a very dangerous precedent. I won't repeat the reasons that McLean outlined, but that seems to be what folks are looking at from a legal and constitutional perspective. It makes sense. The slippery slope is this: like, what do we, if we start charging people for not being vaccinated, what else are we going to charge them for? Like, are you going to be charged if you don't take your prescribed medication? Are we going to impose like a Japan style fat tax? Like, we're in the middle of an opioid crisis. Are we going to charge people who willingly ingest narcotics and overdose? Like, no. I know that some of these sound ridiculous, but it is a very dangerous precedent when you violate the principle of universality, which our country holds near and dear. That said, threats seem to work, because as soon as Quebec announced it, they had a record number of folks register for their very first vaccine, and 7,000 in one day, it sounds like. So I don't like the policy itself, but maybe threaten it and then pull it away once folks have actually registered to be vaccinated.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, actually. I think, they have seen an uptake. Quebec also saw an uptake because they said you needed to be vaccinated to buy alcohol and cannabis from stores, which quadrupled their first dose vaccination appointment rate as well. So maybe that's an idea. Jillian, oh, sweet Jillian, the most foul-mouthed of all the panel members, after last week, and I'll just check my notes here, you said COVID should, quote, suck it, and I apologize for not I missed that reference during the show, but bring us your spicy take on COVID now. So the vax tax, the idea that BC's ruled it out, what do you make of all this?
Well, first I have to say I stand by what I said last week,
okay.
And I think most people would agree with me, even if they wouldn't use the same language on cable TV. I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is the different political context in Quebec. A day before this happened, their version of Dr. Henry resigned over controversy around the curfew and some of the other health measures that they've had. They also have an election this year. And they're less vaccinated than BC. We've got the highest vaccination rate at 90%, and they're sitting at 78%. So I think, it's a different context, and it wasn't surprising to see the NDP government rule this out, given, their position on a fully public system for healthcare. I think at the same time, there is more that we could be doing to be reaching that 10% of people who are still unvaccinated. I think that something like, requiring a passport for liquor stores and cannabis stores could make sense. It's also enforceable because, the employees there are already used to checking ID. I also think, looking at the research of what actually changes people's minds, at this point, we've had a mandate for a while. People are pretty dug in. We know that it's actually having like face-to-face individual conversations with people, which isn't easy. But that's kind of the pushback that we saw from the community services sector in Quebec. They said, why not give us the resources to do the outreach that needs to be done to have these hard conversations with the people whose minds are so hard to change? I think that one of the risks of a policy like this is it just further radicalizes people who are already, in many cases, radicalized. And I think we have to think about the long-term ramifications of that.
Yeah, that's a tough one because they, the vaccine passport radicalized people who were maybe already radicalized, but it certainly was a kind of a rallying cry for a lot of the freedom people that were out there. And I'm sure that the vax pass, the vax tax in Quebec is going to be a similar thing. So you're right; it's hard to reach them. I don't see the BC government ever considering this idea. I think they shot it down very quickly for a number of reasons. Jillian, you mentioned that we have a much higher vaccination rate here, 90% two-dose adults. Quebec is 77. Ideologically, the New Democrats always start talking about universal health care and Tommy Douglas and all of that. They don't want any fees or anything. It just to the core of their party, they don't want that. And then there's a little bit of Quebec, I think, playing to the angry kind of majority mob here, saying that the majority of people want severe consequences against the unvaccinated. And that's just not something Dr. Henry or Adrian Dix, and say what you want about their decisions, and there's a lot of valid criticism to make there, but neither of them have ever played that card or that route. They've always resisted that. So I wasn't surprised BC ruled it out. And I think if you're waiting, anyone's waiting for BC to jump in on a punitive penalty to the unvaccinated, I don't think we're going to see that here. But it certainly was a talking point across the country. Lost in all of this, and lost over our show for the last few weeks, has been the BC Liberal leadership race. And we want to jump back into that because there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened in the last week or so. 6 of the 7 campaigns in that race have written a letter to the party complaining about irregularities in new membership signups. And this is kind of how it works in a party leadership race. A mass amount of people are signed up to vote for different camps. The one outlier of the camp not involved in that letter, Kevin Falcon, who has taken a kind of counterpoint to this, that these complaints are overly based on race and ethnicity and unfair, where the other parties, the other candidates, are saying that there's all sorts of problems with email addresses and names and addresses and things that don't match up to make a membership eligible. We are on the verge of this race being almost over in February. We got one more leadership debate. We have the vote, I think, on the 5th of February, or just a couple days before that as well. So what is this? And we'll start with you, Katie, on this. But what is this? We see this come up in other leadership races over time. And what does it mean for the Liberals in this kind of final few weeks of the campaign?
Yeah, so I want to be clear. This is something that does happen across the political spectrum in many political parties over the years. I think back to 2011 during the NDP leadership race when there was some challenges with Adrian Dix signups. Back in 2000, when Ujjal Dosanjh won, he was accused of cheating, and the race was described as so divisive that the candidates just might kill each other. Federal Liberals have challenges with big nominations, and yes, we've had challenges with the BC Liberals in 2011 and in 2018 as well. So what I want to say there is this is nothing new. Now, does that mean it's right? Does that mean it's helpful? Does that mean it's good for unity? No. I think, frankly, a number of things can be true simultaneously. Number one, as mentioned, leadership races of all kinds have challenges like this. Number two, often they are concentrated in cultural communities, and that is a piece that needs to be rectified immediately. 3, though, the young operatives working 20 hours a day at the BC Liberal Party are they're just trying to run an ethical leadership race. They are not racist. And number 4, I do think that in terms of membership tracking and processing, I do think that the BC Liberal algorithm could use an update. For example, you get a negative ding if there's more than 5 folks in your household. That seems like something that needs to be refreshed. So, but overall, this is not unexpected, not great for unity, especially with a party that's a little bit more fragile. Whenever you're in opposition and not government, leadership races can be inherently even more divisive. So my hope is that whoever wins is able to just repair these wounds and fractures very, very quickly, because there's too much at stake for the free enterprise movement in this province, quite frankly.
Just before I move on, Katie, do you think this is an anyone but Falcon kind of movement? Do we read anything into the fact that all one campaigns are on one side complaining about the bulk of memberships signed up by Kevin Falcon?
Well, it would logically make sense. Like when the membership deadline came to a close, the Falcon campaign was out very quickly, claiming 60% of the new memberships were theirs. So naturally, as a competitor, you're going to want to rally folks around you to try and get some of those tossed out so that you have a fighting chance. Not saying it's a great tactic, but it is a tactic nonetheless.
Yeah. Jillian, what do you think of all this? Is this, I mean, it looks to me, watching it from the outside, it's kind of embarrassing to watch all the Liberal MLAs in the last few days pile on, retweeting, kind of attacking each other in a way. But I guess sometimes that's just how leadership races go. How have you kind of viewed the last couple of weeks here?
Well, I mean, Katie has shared some really great insights, but I think that, they're down to the wire. It's indicative of the fact that, the vote is very close. It's looming. There's no more work to be done in terms of signing up members. They already have been submitted. And I think that there is also a frustration. It's very frustrating to run a leadership campaign during a pandemic. I've been through that experience myself, and it's really hard, like you said in the intro, that to get attention for the things that you want to be talking about, housing policy and all of these other things, because everybody is so focused on the ongoing emergency. So I think that situation has really privileged Kevin Falcon as the presumed frontrunner and as the candidate with probably the best name recognition. And I think we're starting to see the frustrations of the other campaigns boil over a little bit. That's what it seems like to me. But I mean, yeah, it's not great for optics. I think it also, I don't know what's been happening behind the scenes, but I think that when you are a party, it's really important to make sure that everybody has trust in the process, because it's critical to be able to bring people together after the campaign is over. And I wonder, what's been happening behind the scenes that's allowing this to spill over into the public and into the media.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes the race can be so divisive that, that those people don't join, the winner behind them. And that can be a risk as well. I mean, Christy Clark's victory as the leadership candidate over Kevin Falcon, exasperated some long-standing disputes between the two of them that eventually led to him leaving as well. So you're right. Confidence in the process helps people stay together if they can, united a little bit afterwards.
Can I say
Katie?
One tiny thing on that?
Yeah.
I think that we should give Christy credit. Like, her strategy after that leadership race was masterful, in the sense that she immediately sought to bring key folks from Kevin's campaign into her premier's office. I think that she was really respectful of anyone that supported a candidate other than herself, to keep them engaged in the political process. And that's what I would love to see at the end of this race as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do see that. I mean, it happens in every leadership campaign. David Eby and John Horgan had some problems, and they settled that out. Adrian Dix was a pretty nasty, at some points, NDP leadership race in 2011, and they settled that out. So you're right. Yeah, it's a sign of a leader to open some doors for their competitors afterwards in the larger scheme of things. McLean, what do you think of all this?
I think that sometimes the general public doesn't quite understand the passions that come from an internal party leadership contest, and that's because it looks like it's a bunch of friends squabbling over who gets to be first among equals, and to an extent that's true, but the stakes are in some ways more immediate than even a general election. Take the last provincial election. The BC Liberals, that's the party we're talking about, lost, obviously. That still means there are jobs in the legislature. If a new leader comes in, I'm not suggesting that Kevin Falcon or anyone else would do this. And to Katie's point, Christy Clark did not do this. But there's always a chance they could clean house. Bring in their people. Get rid of all the people from the past and just do a clean sweep. And so there's a lot more fear sometimes in a party leadership contest. This is kind of your chance to have a role. And if you lose, you might be on the outside looking in, even more than if your party loses in the general election. And that's not even getting into, sometimes it's harder to lose to your friends than to the other. And so, yeah, you do see this in every party leadership contest, more or less, in this province in the last 20 years. And that's probably not going to change.
All right, I'm going to pull an audible here. We don't have a hot take this week, but I want to go just quickly through the panel on this subject again, because there's one point Vaughn Palmer raised in a Vancouver Sun column this week saying, what if Elections BC was put in charge of party leadership races? Technically, it's not because these are private clubs, but would it be a good idea? Why don't we just quickly go through, Katie, starting with you?
Yeah, I think this is a worthwhile endeavor, and I want to give props to Gavin Dew. He raised this as a possibility as well. And I think even before that, in 2011, this was first raised during the NDP leadership race. So obviously there is a desire from both parties to go down this path. And so I definitely think it's worth pursuing, yes, as long as it applies to all political parties in this province.
Yeah. Jillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, this is the process that could result in someone becoming premier, like we saw in the case of Christy Clark's leadership race. I think that there still needs to be a role for parties to come up with some of the rules, but I think the audit and oversight of the vote to ensure that there's that integrity makes sense to have an independent body overseeing that.
Yeah. McLean?
Devil will probably be in the details, but I think it's an idea worth looking at for sure. I'm curious what the dividing line is for a party to be big enough to warrant Elections BC overseeing this. But that said, it is absolutely worth considering.
Well, since everyone's agreeing, I feel like I should take the opposite position, even though I don't actually want to argue the opposite position. I think you can maybe make the argument when they were just privately donated parties, but we're putting public money into the parties now. You probably need to have some sort of oversight. It probably makes sense to have Elections BC in there, keeping tabs on things like they do with the finances and other parts of political parties. We want to talk about housing affordability, and the BC government once again raised the threshold for the homeowners grant, almost up to $2 million, so that 92% of people can be eligible for this grant. And in the process of doing that, it has to basically acknowledge that it has not got a handle on the housing market and the real estate sector, which it promised to do 5 years ago. I guess no government really does, including federally. But it is kind of an admission that things are getting wild and out of control here. Katie, what do you think of this? And is there any political risk for the NDP in doing this, one way or the other?
Yeah, that's what I really want to focus on. Like, I think BC may have swung left ideologically in recent years, but raising taxes during an affordability crisis would be the height of political insanity. And I think the NDP knows that. The homeowner grant has been the most reliable form of tax relief for 90% of homeowners since 1957. And quite frankly, getting rid of it would be as politically palatable as bringing back the HST. So I think it's interesting. I think the NDP have really changed their tune. They're sounding more like BC Liberals now. No new taxes, massive increase in supply, like focus on new builds around SkyTrain and other rapid transit. I felt like these were lines I was, writing in the Premier's office. So that's my take.
That's how you hold the middle in Metro Vancouver, I guess, where all the votes are. Yeah. Jillian, there's two expert reports that say BC should get rid of the homeowner grant, use the $1 billion it costs for other things. Both reports have been stuffed into the back of a filing cabinet so no one can talk about them anymore. Do you think government should be following those or looking at it?
Well, I think that, Katie and I think the housing minister has also said that, because of the affordability and inflation, you just can't justify it right now. One of the reports, the first one that was a provincial report, when we scrapped the MSP fees, didn't propose eliminating it entirely. What they proposed was instead making it means tested, so it's based on your income, and also applying it to renters to make it more equitable, because I think that's the other thing is there's a huge fairness aspect to this where renters don't receive anything. The government has proposed rebates for 2 election cycles in a row and not yet delivered on those for renters. And I think that's, it's a political issue for them because increasingly, especially, voters in my generation are not able to afford homes in the first place and might be looking at lifelong renting. I think so. To me, I think that would be a good middle ground. I don't think that it makes sense for somebody making, upwards of 6 figures that owns a $2 million home to be getting $500 a month. That's really not a good way to spend $1 billion, in my opinion.
Yeah. The renter's rebate has not materialized. Maybe because when you get into government, it's a great thing to promise in opposition. You get into government, you realize the largest voting bloc in the province is the homeowners. They're mainly higher income. They're mainly older. They're mainly reliable voting bloc. They're going to show up at the polls. And you start to cater a little bit towards them. McLean, Katie already touched on this, but the political backlash to doing something to the homeowner grant, even if you could justify it with a bunch of reports, would be immense.
It would indeed. And here's the thing. All of these reports they imply that getting rid of the homeowner grant would help housing affordability, but only in a if you take that money and do this with it kind of way. You could make that exact same argument about tripling the PST. It doesn't. Raising the homeowner grant is essentially a way of transferring money to municipalities, because you're essentially subsidizing property taxes. Again, you'd have to find a way to give that money back to the cities, unless you're just asking homeowners to just pay it, which would amount to a tax hike, or find another way to raise money to pay for all these housing projects that apparently this $1 billion would go into. It's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation. And you're right. I think this morning David Eby said something like 62% of people in Metro Vancouver are homeowners, and just saying you're going to raise their taxes willy-nilly, it won't go over so well.
Yeah, no, there's a reason why it's 65 years this homeowner grant has been in place, and it's immensely popular, and no government wants to touch it, and no government will, even though it doesn't, in some ways it doesn't make sense economically if you have limited money to give tax breaks to homeowners when you don't give any to renters. But that's the situation the government's in, and changing it would just be an immense backlash, I think, for sure. So we'll keep an eye on the homeowner grant. The reason we're mentioning it is not because it's kind of arcane, but it's another example of housing affordability being wildly out of control. A government that promised 5 years ago to get a handle on it and has had trouble doing that because all the levers you got to pull are going to make somebody unhappy. And those somebodies that are unhappy can be very large blocks of people who are going to vote against you. So that is I think housing affordability will continue to be in the top of the political agenda, federally and provincially as well. So thank you everyone for watching us in this at-home edition of Political Capital, listening to us. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast feed to get the latest ding in your pod box. I don't even know if it's called that. That lets you know that the show is out. And we'll be back next week on Political Capital. Thanks so much for watching.